Okay, good morning, everybody. It's 9 o'clock on the first Tuesday of the month. We're here for Donuts and Development. I'm Carl Dyke from Tridec. We again have packed the Bechtel boardroom. Thanks for everybody for showing up in person. Standing room only, as far as we know, right, guys? We also appreciate everybody joining us online. This is one of our member benefits for being a Tridec member. Today we got a great down. We're going to talk about essentially the real estate market and aspects of it in the Tri-Cities. So I will go ahead and do introductions, and I'll just go down the line in no particular order. First of all, Jeff Losey is the Executive Director of Tri-Cities Home Builders Association or Home Builders Association of Tri-Cities.
Yeah.
Is there a preference?
Well, we put Tri-Cities at the end of it.
At the end, okay.
Yes.
There's Tri-Cities. Jeff, thanks for being here.
I appreciate you having me.
Our own April Connors. April is the managing broker for the Connors Group, part of the Windermere Group, also our 8th District representative. Good morning, April.
Good morning.
Thanks for joining us. And Matt, fresh from having a new baby, Matt Heuer from the Realtors Association. He's the Government Affairs Director for Tri-Cities Association of Realtor. Matt, thank you for maybe get back into anything. I appreciate the sacrifice, but thanks for joining us this morning.
Thank you. It's nice to be here.
So we thought we'd just start off with kind of an overview of everybody's sector. And I think, Matt, you agreed to kind of give us some general stats on the real estate market here in the Tri-City. How's it going, comparison contrast with, a year ago, something like that? Where are the trends going? You want to kick us off?
Sure. As of last week, our PAC MLS, where all the listings are managed, was sitting at around 1,224 active listings in the Tri-Cities market, Pasco, Kennewick, West Richland, and some of the outliers around the area here. Now, with those listings, the ones under contract were sitting around 450. That's about 37%. I have gone back and forth with a couple designated brokers, managing brokers from some of the firms here, and typically a nice balanced market, they like to say, sits at about 50% of your listings are under contract. If it is greater than 50%, you're in a seller's market where people are lining up to take these homes off the market. Under 50% at this 37% range we're at is a little bit more of a buyer's market. And again, is this a short-term buyer's market, or is this a new kind of cycle starting here in the Tri-Cities? We don't know for sure, but we do know the interest rates are down 5.99, and that certainly helps get some of the people off the sidelines. I think the big question in everybody's mind is at 1,224 listings, this is a total that we haven't seen for almost a decade, which is good, but you need the buyers to kind of fill those homes too. So, but what everybody's asking is why did it jump up? Where's everybody going? And so far from realtors on the ground and talking to other brokers, they say it's all life cycle stuff. It's your downsize, births, upsize, divorces, death, job changes, things like that. So would love to get a little more narrowed in on why the listings are up, but that's not a bad thing. That's a healthy market. We just want more buyers to kind of come off the sidelines. And, we're looking to Federal Reserve meeting in the next couple of weeks. We hear there's hopefully another interest rate they're going to take a little bit off there. And if that can keep kind of ticking down, we're going to really enter into a nice pace for early spring next year. So,
do you guys track, like people that are in the market that then are interested in buying a home, that things like interest rate change might spur them to get into the market versus, people that are moving here for a job? I think I've just been here 5 years, and it feels like we've continued to increase our population. People coming here for a job, they need a house. Do you have any feel, and I'm looking at April too, as our resident expert, on how to track that, or is it just, are there any stats around that?
Do you have sense?
like people wanting to buy, essentially.
Yeah, so I mean, like you said, like the kind of market forces, if the interest rate's down and people could buy more house for the same payment, they start maybe looking at moving up or scaling up. They're already here, they already have a job, versus people that are moving into the market, adding to the population. Gotta buy a house.
And I think some of the best thing to do is to talk to the agents that are on the ground. For instance, I did an open house this weekend in Creekstone, and the folks that were looking, both sets of buyers were looking to downsize.
Okay.
They are have big family homes. They don't need any more. The kids are off to college.
Sure.
And so, but their problem is there's locked in at a 3% interest rate. And the thought of buying less of a home and having the same payment is a problem.
Yeah.
And so the interest rates coming down to 5.99 this last week were helpful.
Yeah.
But I think to really, my personal opinion, to see things really start to kind of really move is if they got it at 5. If you got to 4.99, it's a number in people's head where they're like, okay, this is a closer amount to what I can afford and what I can do. And so I do think that the interest rates are keeping a lot of people, like Matt said, on the sidelines, like we're not quite ready, even though, historically 5.99 is an amazing interest rate. People have just gotten so used to it being so low.
Old time perspective, right?
Correct.
Like, you have a 30-year perspective, it's different. You have to different perspective or something.
Yeah. And we need those folks with those bigger homes to actually sell them and downsize, because sometimes those bigger homes are needed for, people that have 6 kids like Matt.
Exactly. Well, and you bring up a good point, Jeff, from the, new home construction standpoint, which obviously new home construction could also fill that need, but what are you seeing as far as trends within your members?
Yeah, it's been a difficult year, and I would say over the time that I've been at the Home Builders Association, this has been one of the most difficult years, in as much as things are still great in Tri-Cities. However, with President Trump, how he came in with DOGE, with tariffs, and then with locally the layoffs, that did have a chilling effect on the Tri-Cities economy at the end of the day. It certainly caused a lot of pause. And at the beginning of the summer is when we typically see, that's when the builders are from sun up to sundown and then some working. It wasn't that way this spring. So this spring we were down 22% year over year in new single family permits that were pulled. However, through the end of July, we're still waiting on a couple of jurisdictions for August, but the numbers came back up. And so we're 5% ahead of 2024 through July. So there definitely was an uptick. But all those things being considered has definitely caused builder confidence to pump the brakes a little bit, not get too far out over their skis to see what's going to happen. Because at the end of the day, we still have tariffs looming. Canadian lumber tariffs still have not been settled, and Trump holds the key as to how much that tariff is going to be, and the likelihood of U.S. timber companies jumping on board to try to alleviate some of that, to think they're going to do it for 3 years, is a little bit problematic and a little bit challenging. So how this is all going to vet out with the tariffs, and then the other challenge that we saw that also caused the builders to hit the pause button because it was affecting prices was suppliers were adding additional costs to materials based on the tariffs that they hadn't even paid yet. So that was having an effect, and some of them were getting called on it, but everybody's trying to take advantage of and position themselves. But the end product for the consumer in housing, the construction inflation right now is around 5 to 7, somewhere in that. I haven't seen the exact number, but it's been vacillating between 5 to 7%. And that is what's also contributing to why is housing not affordable.
Yeah.
The tariffs don't help.
Yeah.
Long run, yes.
I mean, like I don't know, 2,000 square foot house, what percentage of the construction cost or the material cost is framing?
It depends on the house.
Okay.
And it's hard to get into that, but I will tell you that on average, just in talking about the sheer cost, because tariff is a regulation, right? About 25% of the cost of every home is regulations. Okay. From local to state to federal. Yeah. There's a lot of hands that touch the levers that affect the cost of a home. And it's about 25%.
We like permits.
Yep.
Connection fees.
Permits, GMA, Fish and Wildlife, Department of Energy, all of those things combined, it all hits.
I think on the point about Canadian lumber, we don't have the sawmills. So they're running full out.
Yeah.
Even if they got more timber to cut, they could process it, and you can't build a sawmill in a year. So it's a great point.
will end. The our new commissioner of public lands has just decided to put 70,000 acres of timber that could be potentially harvested for lumber into conservation.
Yeah.
And that is, our south central district. So
Does the legislature have any oversight on, because I think the Constitution says something like state lands need to be for highest and best use. So, I mean, is it more profitable to not cut trees and get some carbon credit than it is to cut them?
well, the problem with not cutting the trees too is a lot of that money goes to our public school system.
Exactly.
And so that is going to be, I think, a big topic of conversation in the state legislature this year.
Yeah.
We have some members that are in, southwestern Washington that are actually working on that right now.
Yeah.
So.
I mean, it'd be an interesting comparison, right? So it's like, how do they meet the constitutional clause of highest and best if they don't get revenue from it?
Correct.
Well, that's a good segue. April, could you talk about some of what came out of last legislative session that are potentially affecting the housing and building construction markets? And then, maybe give us some insight into, just like what you talked about, are there some upcoming issues the legislature will deal with next year?
Sure. Well, 2 years ago, they called the Year of Housing, which there was a lot of housing legislation that came out that year, which is, it's really hard for cities and counties and public officials to put all of those statutes into code. There was the middle housing bill, there was the ADU bill that came to all of our cities. And not that those are bad legislation, but it caused a lot of oversight over our local jurisdictions and things they had to do that normally they wouldn't have had to do before, or requirements on what type of housing they had to allow. So it was the state basically dictating to our local cities and counties what they could build or what they should be building on land, but didn't have to build unless the community wanted it. So that was 2 years ago. Last year, there was a bill that came out that was a lot splitting bill that allowed people that had a larger lot to be able to split it and put another home on it if the lot was feasible and large enough to do that, which, I felt was a good bill, especially for people who are sitting on a little bit larger lot that could put a second house on it to be able to split it and sell it and use it for housing. The other big bill that came out of this last session was actually the rent control bill. They called it rent stabilization. And that was to put a certain cap on how much a person who owned a rental home could sell the house or rent the house for and increase that rent every year. That bill is very troublesome, at least to me personally, because rent control has never ever panned out in any community it has ran and run before. And so that one was a hard bill that passed. I am personally seeing the effects of that in my day job, where we have a client who owns 7 rental homes in the Tri-Cities. They have now sold 4 of them. That means they actually stayed in the housing market, but now they're not an affordable alternative. And these are homes that we're renting for $1,300 a month, 3 and 4 bedroom homes. They were affordable for families. So that bill to me was very concerning. Also on a development perspective, they excluded new construction for 12 years, that they wouldn't be under the rent cap bill, but after 12 years, they are subject to the rent cap as well. We had developers from Canada and Seattle that told us outright that if Washington State passes this bill, we're done building in the state of Washington. And so, well, we have a lot of houses on the market right now. Washington State is in a housing crisis. We're over 1 million units short for the next 20 years. And if we don't continue to build, and if we don't continue to build affordable housing, then we are going to continue to see, people that aren't going to be able to afford it. They're going to go into rental positions rather than being able to increase generational wealth and buy homes. And so that bill to me is worrisome. There was a cap that it couldn't go over a certain CPI every year. And, my fear is that we'll go back to the legislature this year and that CPI, consumer price index, will be taken off of the rent cap, and we'll end up with a rent cap that will cause more people to sell and less people to want to build a rental property in Washington State.
As a legislator and your position in the House now, floor leader,
yeah.
We're very proud of you.
Thank you.
Do you see any interest in just the legislative body in general, politics aside, have any interest in data that helps inform policymaking? Because to your point, like when there's these trends that are happening, is there any appetite to, have a feedback loop? I think we've talked about, we'll talk more about Growth Management Act, of the state hasn't been very proactive in taking a look back and saying, hey, maybe we can make this better, making changes. But do you feel like there's any appetite from the supermajority or from your party, either one, to have data be some type of guide in like, golly, we passed this bill and then all these unintended consequences happen. Maybe we should take a look at this and modify it.
I would like to say that data matters, but with the rent control bill, I spent 3 years on that bill, and we defeated it the first 2 years. Last year did not happen. But we constantly provided data, as did the home builders, the realtors, everyone that's providing the rental housing association. Everyone was providing the data of what has happened in other cities, what's happened in New York, what's happened in San Francisco. But the data it was rebranded as rent stabilization. We're stabilizing the market. We're not controlling the market, but it's still, no matter how you put it, it was rent control.
Yeah.
And so we would love to say that the data matters, but it is very, it's very difficult right now in the State House. There's definitely a shift, and I don't want to get really political, but there's definitely in the House a shift more further to the left. So we are dealing with people that run businesses for a living. I think a lot of people in the room run a business or are used to being part of a business. And so we're seeing a lot of, we want to help people, and I want to help people too, but we have to figure out how do we help people and keep people here, keep businesses here.
Of course.
The other big bill that passed this year as part of the budget was to increase the estate tax. And that was a significant increase in basically the death tax in Washington state. And so we're seeing effects of that in the real estate market as well. We're seeing, I have 3 clients, just myself, and there's a lot of realtors, I don't know how many now in Tri-Cities, but there's a lot of realtors, and I have 3 clients that are moving out of the state to avoid that tax. And that doesn't just affect our local economy. It doesn't just affect them moving out of the state. It also affects the philanthropy that happens, because these are people that have been engaged in our community, have wanted to give back, and now they're choosing to leave the state because of the taxes and the burdens that were put on this year.
When you talk about the housing crisis that we're in, at the gap of 1 million houses, it would be great if there was that shared goal from both parties, like how are we going to address this to do that. But it doesn't seem like there's that connection in between. This is where we are. We all know this is a problem. The housing gets talked about a lot, but then it's challenged to be able to put together legislation that might work towards fixing it practically.
Commerce this year, we have a new commerce director, and he's very in tune to the housing problem, came out of the state Senate, and is willing to work on the issues this year. So I have a little bit of hope there. The governor's office would also, his goal was to build quite a few houses, and 200,000 or 250,000 in his first term. But I don't see the legislation that is pushing us in that direction yet. And so that's something that I'm committed to working on, and committed to working with the majority party on to try to get there.
Yeah, that's great. I think that you and your seatmates do such a good job working bipartisanly. Politics aside, what we all believe in, what's going on nationally, you guys go to Olympia and get stuff done and bring results back for all of us in here. So we appreciate it.
Well, and I think if I can,
of course,
on the rent control.
Yeah.
So April and the data is what's painful. And I think, everybody in this room and those that are watching, it's Tri-Cities and this side of the state has a very much different view on what it takes to get things to work. And I think the struggle is, one, to not give up, because it's really easy based on the challenges that April sees every day. But when you have the data that shows that rent control has worked nowhere. I have peers in Connecticut, and Connecticut is a very blue state. They didn't pass rent control or rent stabilization, whatever you want to call it. But at the end of the day, we've now increased, the legislature has, not April, but the legislature has increased the cost of rental units in Washington state in one session. So because I asked one of our larger property managers, what's the average that you've been seeing over the years? And he's like, well, 3 to 5%. I go, so now 7% minimum plus CPI, which means you're going to be at 10% no matter what you do, because you can't go backwards. And it's one of the most, it really cripples the housing and affordability. And Carl, you brought it up. We've been talking about housing affordability, attainability for years. And we're one of the last 4 states that's still playing under the Growth Management Act, and affordable housing is one of the tenets in there. But the legislature is unwilling to go back and take a look. And how have you affected it? And it's supposed to be about local control, and it's not.
Yeah.
It falls short on all those pieces. And so April's doing the best that she can, and with the group from the 8th to 16th and those that keep trying to push the ball up the hill, but it's a heavy lift. And I think we're now seeing that the foot is on the gas pedal. There's not many brakes being applied. And then when you talk about the new taxes that are coming down, just on businesses alone that affects construction and here, everything is going up, which just means, so from land use, how we use it, and then don't get this group started on shrub step and the pitfalls with that, and an archaic map system that Fish and Wildlife wants their biologists to use to tell our local biologists on how they're supposed to mitigate this. And so, all those things being added up, and then we got a legislative, now the budget's going to be 2.2 billion in the hole. And they've already increased 7 billion in new taxes last year. So I don't have a lot of hope this coming legislative session that there's going to be a lot of want to change the taxing structure, which is crushing construction. And it's not going to make it any easier. The only hope right now is really interest rates, and then this continuum of, clearly in Tri-Cities, usually when commercial is up, residential slows down a bit. We see Chick-fil-A, we're all happy about that. And that's a big starter, but there is commercial happening. Yeah. And so that's the impotence behind, you get the commercial and then you get the rooftops that follow behind that. Yeah. And so it's still there. And so just trying not to get those wheels coming off too fast. April, good luck. I'll give you all the data. Just keep driving it up the hill because it's not easy.
And for those in the room that maybe don't know what the Growth Management Act is and urban growth boundaries, you can tell by the edge of our cities there we're confined in where we can't build fast. And so I've been working on a series of legislation with BIAW, the home builders statewide, on trying to change like small pieces of the Growth Management Act to allow for more housing, because unless we have more land, and Tri-Cities is a little bit different. We're very fortunate, like in West Richland, we still have 7,000 acres inside of the Growth Management Act that the ranch that they're getting ready to start developing and moving forward with. But a lot of other, you can't just look at Tri-Cities, you can look at the whole state, and a lot of other other areas of the state do not have this type of ground available. So I've been running legislation that just tweaks growth management a little bit. I feel like I finally got a hearing last year, so that was good. And then at that hearing, I did have a Democrat on the majority side of the aisle that said, hey, I'm from Oregon and we've changed our Growth Management Act. Why has Washington State not touched theirs in years? And so I do feel like the more you keep pushing on a topic, that eventually if you stay with it and you work with others along the other side of the aisle, that eventually you will get there. And I do think in the next 2 years, we're going to get there slightly. But I think some of the bigger concerns that Jeff would probably have too is the building council, state building code council, where they are putting all of these different guidelines and codes and things to build a home that are just constantly are increasing the cost of building the house.
No, those are really good points. Matt, from your perspective at the Realtors Association and being the government affairs director, this conversation that we're having, do you see from the Realtors Association perspective any things that potential new legislation next year that you guys will come back or working on? And I think this is really good because TriDeck sits with our partners here in the Tri-Cities Legislative council. So it's Visit Tri-Cities, Regional Chamber, Hispanic Chamber, West Richland Chamber, Pasco Chamber, all of us sitting together. We set our priorities, and then we have our day in Olympia where we invite all of our legislators as well as some from other districts to kind of put forth like our top priorities. So do you see anything coming up that we could potentially, help out with as we can? Obviously, April and our teammates are fighting the fight, but we gotta, as a community, we gotta show up and back them up, right?
I think Jeff and April both kind of laid out the dilemma playing out in Washington State, where you can go to the majority with facts, and we did. And one of the ones we presented was the fact that property owners will sell if you bring rent control about. You tell them that flat out, and guess what? They're still selling. So that restricts that supply even more and drives those costs up even more, simple supply and demand. So in my mind, April is faced with the greater burden, the tougher part of the battle. Talking to a bunch of people, definition of insanity is,
Right.
if you expect a different outcome, right? And so she's doing a great job. She's coming up with creative loopholes and ways to try to make things less bad in our area. But I think what Jeff is saying is sometimes it's here, things are being passed, and we have to locally kind of figure out what to do with it. And what I think TriDeck is doing, and even the chamber with, and when I started this, I was pretty naive. I really looked at things like the fees, and I said, well, if I could just fight locally against all these fees, I'll bring down the price of housing, right? But there was so much coming out of Olympia, and it was such an uphill battle, and you're tied into these imaginary boundary lines of the urban growth area. How do you make things less bad? And honestly, I think that what you're doing, what Chamber does, at growing the commercial tax base and bringing in more jobs, better jobs, that to me, I'm starting to see that as the best alternative for our area. There's even camps within our own association, right? You have people that remember the Tri-Cities 30 and 40 years ago, and the huge lots and the big yards, and we have arguments amongst ourselves, and we talk about growth and what that looks like for our area. And I honestly, going forward, I don't see it as an alternative for right now. I mean, if we're going to make things less bad and expect, the next shoe to drop on Tri-Cities, then we have to have serious conversations about infill and this whole urbanization model that maybe people didn't used to think fit in the Tri-Cities, but now we have to understand that we need more tax dollars per square inch. And I think a lot of our city planners, Jacob Gonzalez in Pasco was a big proponent of this. And at the time, 2 and 3 years ago, we pushed back a lot on some of these infill ideas. And now I think people are starting to come around and say, man, the House Bill 1110, the middle housing bill, and rent control, and these things that are trying, that we feel is restrictive to our rural free open area. I think people are starting to understand that it's not that open because of, again, the Growth Management Act. And until that changes, we have to start considering taking the hand we're dealt, essentially, and working with it. And again, I think it's vastly important that TriDeck and the Chamber and Habitat and the HBA and Tri-State Association and some of our larger brokerages, Windermere, C21, we sit down with builders, whoever, and we talk about where's the problem, what can we do, how can we fix it? And we start having these conversations and, kind of a joint committees amongst ourselves to really kind of figure out how to make things less bad. Because April has the toughest battle in that. I always pray for you.
That was my motto when I went to the State House, making things less bad. That was just the whole, yeah.
I think for infill, I think what we see from the employers is that, just the American dream, right? Homeownership is part of the American dream. And our entry level price point is so high that things that maybe 10, 20 years ago, everybody had this vision of a big house, big law, but just being able to buy something versus being able to rent something. And if that's an infill or ADU, at least you get that first jump on the housing ladder, right? I mean, April, you led, and I think you and I are both on the Habitat board now. And so, the project that you led in Pasco for Department of Natural Resources land, where the state can put some of that into affordable housing to partner with the Habitat for Humanity, where that initial price point can be artificially lowered, right? By taking the cost of the land out of purchase price, some type of land banking thing. I mean,
Sure.
innovative ideas like that are great because ultimately we have so many families that are in rental units now that maybe are being sold or whatever, but they'd really like to own a home. So interest rates coming down is good, but then still thinking innovatively, even within the laws that we have, like how can we give people a chance? That's the opportunity, I think.
Jeff said something earlier about 25% of the cost of that home being cooked up into the entire fee structure. For the past few months at TCAR, we've actually been kind of working on a project using Tri-City Association of Realtors.
Thank you.
But we've been working on a project since really the spring, looking at National Association of Home Builders economists as well as National Association of Realtors economists, and looking at how these fees evolve over the course of from development through the build to the end user. And we pulled a lot of case studies from the 90s as well and kind of bounced some things off of those. And it looks like your typical fee of $1,000 typically has about a 1.5 increase. So it becomes a $2,500 cost to the end user. So if 25%, it hits that 150% markup essentially, that is what the typical fee does. And now you look at the typical, I think 80% of homes to get the 30-year mortgage put on it, that fee actually over the lifetime of that purchase becomes closer to 5 times. So $1,000 becomes $5,000. And 25% of, let's say, $400,000, it's $100,000 becomes $500,000 over the course of that 30-year loan. So I've had that conversation with locals when they talk about kind of boosting fees, and here's what they tell me. Yeah, we know. But what else can we do? So
I'll just say, because I talked City Pasco the other day, and like on their water treatment plant, right? They got a water treatment plant that's 100 years old. And they'll admit, the people that are there today, that past electeds and city leadership to a lower, they artificially held their rates down. That's what they say, right? So they didn't keep up with inflation, the cost of and they didn't save anything up to build a new plant that they have to now. So I think there's like an admission doesn't make it any easier to swallow, but I think that, having an understanding of that, because it's like we all see, like inflation is a real part of how economies work, especially when you're growing as fast as our economy's been working. And, prices go up, supply and demand, all those things. But I think that to come up with some better understanding, I think the energy policy or the energy code for the state is a good one, right? In that the goal is to overall lower your operating costs by your electrical rate because the house is more efficient. But if you can't afford to buy it because the upfront costs that are increasing the price of the house defeat that. So I think we're coming back to data, and being able to share data and use facts that drive policy and kind of try to balance it out so that ultimately we could get more people in that first rung of the housing ladder. And then hopefully there is inflation and increase in prices, they can move up just like kind of the American dream everybody does, right?
Well, and I think the challenge has been with the legislature way before you, April, because you're not before you. But we the building industry has challenged, for instance. So we are headed towards net zero homes, and net zero homes means they produce what they will use. Either it's going to be through wind, it's going to be through solar, but the cost to get there. We used to look at what's the return on that investment and how long does it take? Well, right now, the money that the consumers spend on the energy efficiency products, they're not going to see it before they sell it.
Sure.
That's just where we're at. And we lost that in court, that the legislature threw out any efficiencies. It doesn't matter. But if it's going to make it more, even if it's 0.5%, you're going to spend $10,000 to get 0.5%. That's what we're going to do. So that's what we're dealing with when we talk about the inequities about why can't people afford to get in. And instead of trying to figure out a way to get a land trust and do banking and make that more affordable, again, we're sitting here with decisions that are trying to be made at the local level, but all affected in Olympia. And when we sit here with these boundaries that are given and justified by the locals, and even trying to get those boundaries out where it makes sense, like Franklin County's been the fastest growing county for decades, and have to argue and sue to get that boundary pushed out. And that's with the Eastern Washington Growth Hearings Board that are not elected, they're appointed. And so they only answer to the governor, whoever that is. And so that all leads into the price of where the challenge is, which there isn't any easy answer except for April taking little nuggets that she can chip out on the GMA. And I think it's important for people to know too. So the school districts used to be with us on the GMA, and now they are able to purchase land outside of the GMA, and they won that in Olympia. And we didn't want that to happen, because now you have school districts that can purchase outside the GMA because it's less expensive.
Sure.
Well, so private companies can't do the same thing. They can also have infrastructure that goes out there, which again, isn't a bad thing. However, if it's good for the public sector, it should be good for the private sector too, because that's what's killing everything. But then that realization never hits. So then we sit here where we are, which is you drew the line and the price of the land just infinitely goes up. And this is where we just keep going in circles about how do we just take the little wins that we can and try to advance it from there.
Well, and that is the purpose for when you go back to the bill that I did with DNR.
Yeah.
Is because it's so expensive. And the cities, they have a lot of permitting fees and things that the cities are charging. Some of that is due to their tax rates that they can do, and they're trying to make up money and value where they can. But it's taking the land price out of the home build. And so that's the only way you can make homes less expensive. And that concept isn't new. Meadow Springs was on DNR land and was a leased land project for years.
Wow.
I mean, I think it wasn't too long after I started real estate that they had just released the land to the homeowners in Meadow Springs. But so it's not a novel concept. It was not being allowed.
Sure.
And so what the bill that Carl was talking about is there are parcels of DNR land. So Department of Natural Resources owns the land. They're not being used for agriculture. They're not being used for forestry. They're just sitting in the middle of a city doing nothing, not making money for DNR, which gives money back to school districts and puts money back in our community. So this land, like in there's some in Richland, there's a big chunk in Pasco, kind of over by the Lowe's and the market over there, the Yokes. And so that piece was sitting there vacant. And so now those land pieces are being able to be used for housing. If someone so chooses to go to DNR and go through the process, and then they would provide a land lease, a land trust underneath, and DNR would lease that land to them at a very small value. So the actual price per month is, think of like manufactured homes, you pay your lot fee. It's very similar for this, but this land's coming from DNR. So the price of the land would be stabilized. So you wouldn't see big increases every month in your lot fee to be able to own a house on those lots. So we entered into a project after that bill was passed with Habitat for Humanity in Tri-Cities. And as far as I know, it's going to be the largest Habitat for Humanity project in the United States for homes. So kind of
The cool thing about that is that the new homeowners can also gain equity in the improvement, so in the house itself, and then they have title to that. They can also sell it, realize that equity, and then just get into the regular market, right? Like I think it's a great solution to try to get people into housing better. Yeah.
So it's a start. It's not a lot, but it's a start.
Yeah. But I think it's innovative, and I think that showing the folks on the west side, especially that are hard to come off at GMA, to show them alternatives or innovative things like that. That's the way that you're really good at that. Building those relationships and showing them like, hey, look at this, we did it. Maybe there's more opportunities to do this. Hopefully, soften up their position a little bit. Yeah. So we do have to talk about shrub step, but then we'll open up to questions from the audience. We talked about GMA, and you guys have done a good job in, describing how it works and I think kind of what its goals are. But who wants to take a shot at describing what's going on with shrub step, how Fish and Wildlife's designation within the State Environmental Policy Act flows into it, and then maybe we can talk about like what happened in California with their equivalent of our state environmental policy act, and maybe that's an opportunity in the legislature that, I mean, they did it in California. If Washington models himself out of California, we should be able to do it that way, right? So let's kick it off. Jeff, April, or Matt, you weren't in our conversations, but what are you hearing from realtors? People like shrub step designations.
I'll kick this one, Jeff.
I can say that I don't drive down the street now and not look at every single sage. So shrub strip is sagebrush. And it is either sagebrush, rabbit brush. So I do not drive down the street any longer without looking and going, oh, they'll never be able to develop that. What's gonna happen there? And so the conversation started because Carl's, their group at Tridec had gotten together and started talking about these issues that they were having with development and particularly shrub step. And I had no idea. They called me and said, can you get involved in this? I'm like, sure. And then not thinking there was any kind of an issue. So basically there's a map that the Department of Fish and Wildlife has created. You can go online and it's pink. And if you look at it, it shades everywhere that there is shrub step. And so shrub step is a native species. Animals like it, especially, jackrabbits and coyotes, maybe, I don't know, a lot of little animals like shrub step. And so we're down to 20% of native shrub step that is left in Washington state. So it's important to preserve. I think it's really important to probably preserve it more outside of the urban growth area than inside, because that is the land that has been committed for us to be able to use for housing and commercial development and moving forward. So Department of Fish and Wildlife used to be very good about how they designated, how people were building, and all of a sudden there's been a change within Fish and Wildlife. So now you have parcels, like the one that would stand out most to everybody by Red Robin. Right behind Red Robin, there's a parcel and there's like a 6-lane road on the other side of it and a Red Robin in front of it, and there's shrub step on this vacant parcel. And so the Department of Fish and Wildlife, in order for someone to develop on that, they would like what's called a 2-to-1 mitigation ratio. So if you have 5 acres, you're going to have to mitigate for 10 acres of shrub step. One of the big problems is not, first of all, there's probably not any animals hanging out in there. And so that's a weird one to maybe mitigate. And then second of all, where do you mitigate at? Where are those conservation acres? Where do you either replant shrub step or find 10 acres that you can put into conservation forever? And our conservation districts aren't doing that right now. There's not a conservation or a land bank to do that. So we're finding a lot of projects in the Tri-Cities, from commercial projects like hotels trying to go in, to housing projects. I had a recently, personally, for myself, I didn't even know I'd be stepping into the shrub step issue and then finding out that I was selling an 80-acre piece of land inside of the UGA that has 13 acres of shrub step on it. And so the buyer is like, I don't really want to buy this property that I can't do anything with those 13 acres when I'm spending in Pasco $200,000 an acre to buy land. And so it has become now not only a big issue here, but luckily, I don't want to say luckily, there's now an issue in Western Washington with another species. It's a tree. And so if I can get some other folks from the other side to start thinking and considering this as well, we can probably work on some more mitigation issues, but you can take it from. You're working on it.
I know, but I didn't want to step on anything because you got to go back there and deal with it. Because I have some personal opinions about their mapping but like, even if you go like Edgar Brown Stadium. So I look it up. It's been around since 1957. And if you look at their shrub step map, there is some prime shrub step around Edgar Brown Stadium. And I don't know if y'all have been there anytime recently, but there's not prime shrub step around there. And so that's how old and out of date these maps are. And April is doing the best she can with Fish and Wildlife, and they've answered the questions and they're working on it. But at the end of the day, it has the opportunity to halt commercial, to halt new neighborhoods, because you can't do it. And if our conservation districts, which this is another piece that came out this year as well, which is The conservation districts aren't going to do it, so we have to find another way to mitigate the 2-to-1 if it's going to be. And it's been a carte blanche 2-to-1 no matter what it looks like. So that's been the other challenge. There's been no real direction from Fish and Wildlife. They admitted this, but they said this is the best available science. That's their best available science. So that's also driving up the cost of everything, whether it's commercial or residential. And so again, with I think back to the 2.2 billion deficit, where are they going to get the money to look at the maps, remap it? And then it just costs more time because the developers go out there and to do a feasibility study and to go through SEPA, you're still going to spend thousands of dollars, hire a biologist to then get turned down by Fish and Wildlife, and if you can't mitigate it. And so it's a bigger problem. It boiled over this year, and it hasn't been an issue because I think there's been more common sense applied at Fish and Wildlife, and so we lost some folks. And so now the playbook that they have is old, and now they're trying to apply old rules to what we have now, and it's not good. And I don't know why it happened. Well, I know a little bit why it happened this year, but anyways, it's just another issue that's going to cause development to cost even more money, and trying to fix this issue going forward. Because I think we all live and love Tri-Cities and want to keep it and keep certain areas and keep it the way it is. But connectivity and a nexus to the developments on what you're trying to save and retain, I think that has to come into play. And I think that's where the biologists and Fish and Wildlife, they don't have that set in their mind on what that should look like. So then that's where you've got developers now that they've got folks that have money that want to do projects, but at the end of the day, how much money do you want to spend to get told no and there's no path forward? And that's the challenge.
And I think it's similar to what we talked about before at the legislative level, because you guys, collectively, the legislature passes bills, the governor signs, and that's how laws get created. Then it rolls to the agency like Fish and Wildlife or like Commerce that manage the Growth Management Act, and then they make up the rules. And what you're describing is not only the rule making that the legislature doesn't set, but also then the interpretation or the definition by technicians either on the ground or back in Olympia looking at the map. And I think that process is what, from our perspective, trying to be a good place where we bring businesses in, commercial, industrial, the base of our economy, that there's no certainty from a development aspect. Like, you can't go without spending all this money and hiring your biologist. Like, can I even develop on it? Like for your customer, April. I mean, I think from a policy point of view, it's really hard to argue that these policies, the goal of it, the legislation in things like the State Environmental Policy Act or, the other things that flowed out of it was to critical species that are endangered or something, not federally endangered, but state endangered, that this habitat is critical for their survival or their enhancement or whatever they're trying to do. Nobody has the data that shows, oh yeah, by preserving an acre or a half acre behind red robin, we're saving whatever species, because that's what the goal is, and so there's no connection. And so I think it gets really frustrating. And April, we appreciate you literally picking the ball up and running with it, because I think the process that you used for some of the state licensing requirements for skill centers with TriTech was a great example last year, where you brought in the agency folks, you had the discussion like we had, like we're going to have a follow-up on soon, and then kind of take that back to the legislature to maybe make some tweaks or something like that. And I think that process is very practical and it works. So we look forward to those next steps.
Well, and I think it's important for people to know too, that when, like Carl said, when a bill passes and it goes to rulemaking and the agency makes the rules, unfortunately in Washington State, we don't go back and as a legislature and review those rules. And so the intention of the legislation might not be what Department of Fish and Wildlife or Department of Ecology or whoever made those rules, Department of Labor and Industry. Yeah. They take that legislation, they make the rules, and then the legislature does not go back and say, let's review the rules that they made to make sure that they are focusing on what we intended them to do. And so unless a problem like this comes up, those rules do not get re-reviewed.
Totally. We have about 12 minutes left, so we're going to jump into questions. We do have one from Zoo. And it comes from the perspective of a city that about raising their costs that they have passing on to permits and things like that. Often cities will find to try for grants and other lower cost options to help offset some of the development costs. What suggestions do you have to help offset real estate development costs and mitigation such as impacts to transportation corridors and intersections, water and sewer infrastructures? What can cities do to help with affordability without passing the cost on to taxpayers or home buyer? Are there any ideas? I don't know, Matt, if you guys talk about this about, just because I think this is a good question, right? It's like, hey, we're all here. How can we work together better? How can we come up with better solutions?
I'm a fan of the tax incremental finance zones in the cities. When done right, it takes a very strong planner. You have to really know what your community wants. But I think that a lot of the cities here and the staff, especially somebody like Eric Mendenhall in West Richland, who does like 4 jobs, they're short. They need more help to kind of plan these things. And if they would lean more on the home builders or the Realtor Association, who we can leverage our relationships with NAR. That's actually something Andrew Maggiana is our new CEO there, and he's really a big supporter of bringing NAR to the Tri-Cities. And that's potentially hundreds of thousands of dollars of grant money.
National Association of Realtors.
Yep. A lot of surveys, a lot of polling, understand what your community wants and use that to drive a plan and then make that area a tax incremental finance zone where the future growth in that area that people want will grow, and it doesn't kind of stall out and turn into kind of how this area was for a long time that we're sitting in right now.
Yeah.
But just planning well and including the market dynamics and the public perception through the proper surveys. And again, all that involves time. So just lean on the experts in your area and let us help. A lot of times I see outside consultants from Denver coming in at the tune of, $250,000 of a city budget when we have that survey, we have that answer. So no, some of that's on me. I'll go and I'll try to speak up more, but really just kind of continue building those relationships with city and county staff to where they'll lean on us and use some of our resources that we have federally with our larger associations. And then, TIF. I told Jeff years ago, TIF for TIF, tax incremental financing to mitigate traffic impact fees. That was my, but yeah, I think that it just comes back to planning and just using what we have and getting creative with it.
And Pasco is doing that.
Yeah.
Pasco is doing that off Road 100. They're using tax increment financing.
They were the first one in the state to use it in the Ryman for Dairyville as well, Port Pasco and St. Pasco. So, I mean, Pasco, I think from a jurisdiction standpoint, it's kind of everybody else. I think there are legislative challenges because I think what I heard, the way it was implemented maybe in Southwest Washington, that, you didn't get all the taxing districts on board because fire districts, people who might view it as a threat. So hopefully there isn't some legislative push to change it or take some of its flexibilities away or even do away with it, which would be a shame because it's on the economic development side. Other states have had this for 20 years in some case. So we've been behind the ball. So thank goodness that the legislature did pass it. Pasco as a leader because, we wouldn't have got Dairyville with now $1 billion plant that just fired up. But from an industrial standpoint, let alone what they're doing on Road 100 for the commercial and the real estate development out there too. Yeah, from the audience, Chad.
I appreciate you guys bringing up the Sage Truck because we're in the process of doing our EIS in West Richland right now, and some of the public comment is on truck step and asking about that. But luckily, the Teets family had a lot of that in agriculture, so it eliminates a lot of that. So it is brought up, so thank you for bringing it up because it is an issue and we're talking about it. But my question is, in West, we've had a lot of multifamily and then also 1 and 2 bedroom townhomes come up. We've approved a lot of plats over the last 7 years. And talking to developers, it is mainly seniors that are moving into those homes, which is great. And it might be a question for April. Do you see when you're selling these seniors' homes and they're downsizing, they go to 1 and 2 bedroom townhomes, are they being replaced by first-time home buyers?
In their existing homes?
In their existing homes, yes.
No, it just depends. Like if a lot of the houses that the seniors are moving out of are larger houses. I'm doing one right now, and the people that are moving in have 3 kids. It's a larger house in a neighborhood that's close to a school, and so it just depends. So first time home buyers, unless you're getting them in that $450,000 and less range, and even at that, you're seeing their parents having to do the down payment assistance for them to help them get into these houses at that price. You're really seeing the first time folks at the lower end of the market going in. But the seniors, we could use a senior community in the Tri-Cities. We have a couple of smaller ones. We have Pinewood. There's another one in the Southridge area, but we don't have a lot of 55 plus retirement villages where I think that could be a really sound investment choice for someone in Tri-Cities.
Other questions from the audience? Yeah.
The changes to ADUs, will reduce your rental property, your divided property. Is there going to be data on what the effect of that is? Is that something you guys are already seeing data on, or what the outcomes of those changes are?
Commerce is putting together, so if you go onto their site, they do have some data of what's happening already. I think the ADU bill was particularly really interesting to me because I love ADUs. I actually have an ADU on my property. It was back in the days they had to be connected before they could be a single residence. But there were some concerns on that bill because it allowed up to 2 ADUs per property without any factor of how much land space it was taking for drainage or parking. And so that bill got a little bit interesting, to me. Like, I think that there should be, for instance, like in Edmonds, people were taking their whole lots to put ADUs on, but now they're having problems with drainage in the neighborhood because there's no permeable ground left for the water to go to off of all the rooftops. And so I think there are things that they're going to have to probably go back and look at it, process through, but Commerce is trying to keep track of some of the permits and what's happening and things that are being built down.
But it's all gonna be years down the road.
Take a look back.
Yeah.
Yeah, reason.
Thanks for being here. It's been really educational and helpful. I'm always looking at Carl about, from a healthcare standpoint, recruiting to the area here. And we've had some success over the years recruiting folks, particularly from the west side where housing prices have gotten so high. Some of that. Any tips or advice or ideas you all have in the current market, how we might use the current inventory of housing or changes in legislation or other things to attract more of the types of people we're trying to bring to the Tri-Cities that we should be thinking about?
Well, I think you have right now, we've got quite an inventory of 1,200. And I, as a real estate agent, I've been at it, just so you guys know, I can date myself right now. And I've been doing this for 25 years. And I haven't seen inventory for like this in quite a while. So I would say that we actually have inventory to recruit people right now, especially in that 800 plus range. Lower market seems to move quicker, which would probably be, your nurses and technicians and things like that. But if you're really recruiting doctors right now, I would say that we have a nice supply of kind of more executive style homes that are available in the market right now that haven't maybe been or have been getting multiple offers.
I think too, to just thinking about being innovative, thinking out of the box, because Teresa, as we've had these conversations, you let us know it's not just the doctors or the nurses, it's folks throughout, your facility. And I think about very deep longer than people spend the real estate much longer ago. When I was in high school, I went to a small rural high school back in Idaho, and school district had houses that they owned. And so if you're a first time teacher, you got a cut rate on a place to live, which was a big advantage because the teachers didn't make any money. But would Catholic or other healthcare providers even be able to buy a piece of ground and develop it and almost artificially create this land bank model where the hospital, like there was a condition you had to work for us to get the house that maybe you could get some equity in, but you land bank the the ground or something like that, you know, I mean, things like that would be kind of innovative. I know you guys are in a real pinch, but you know, with something like that would sort of model what people did with the DNR plan be an option.
We tried to, but shrub step.
Good answer. We are just about out of time. So I think this has been, I think Teresa, you sort of said it well, it's been really a good conversation. I appreciate all you guys coming in. Any final words? We'll start lighting you out with Matt.
I was still thrown by his question because my wife is a nurse and we actually tried moving away from Tri-Cities last year. So that kind of hit home a little bit. And ultimately it's like, what kept us here? You know, why did we stay? And it was because of specifically what's unique about the Tri-Cities. We're on the West Coast. I mean, her and I are from the Midwest, and here we find ourselves on the West Coast, but it still feels like home as we knew it growing up. And that's the unique identity of the Tri-Cities that I don't think people understand until they visit and then they take part in the community here. We're cut off from a lot of other areas, but at the same time, it's a great jumping off point for adventures and a place for kids to grow up and kind of explore. So that's really what kept us here. It's just that the unique identity that this place is, and I think that Visit Tri-Cities captures really well. So to even talk with them and kind of collaborate with them, I think it'd be important. But part of that collaboration is kind of what I'm looking forward to in 2026. The relationship I built with Jeff Losey and the HBA over the past few years, the incredible representatives and senator we have out of the 8th district here, even collaborating with Washington Realtors on a lot of projects, being able to leverage NAR, TriDeck, the chamber, everybody seems to really be kicking it into the higher gear and being very open to this cross-team collaboration. And that's extremely unique, I think, for a place this big. And I look forward to seeing what that can do next year, because when we start to speak with a unified voice, I think we can make things less bad much more quickly. So, and I'm hopeful. I'm hopeful for next year and what we can do here, just especially for housing. That's great.
No, I'm kind of like Matt, feel super fortunate to live in the Tri-Cities. We are truly in a unique environment. And I can tell you from a real estate perspective, being in it since I started in 2000, that we have been probably the most fortunate market in Washington state, if not in most of the United States. We have been insulated from a lot of the things that have happened, even when we've had downturns, because of our unique community, between having some of the smartest brains in the United States at Department of Energy and the Hanford site and PNNL and all of these amazing things that we have here that I couldn't imagine living somewhere else. But I do think that there's a lot of things that could be fixed or changed or helped in Washington state. And I am committed, at least for now, to staying in office for a while and trying to figure out and working with the other side of the aisle and trying to get good things done that matter to the Tri-Cities and to be able to go over and tell our story. I mean, that's the important part, is to tell our story and have people that will hopefully listen and learn and want to work with folks from Eastern Washington to understand that while we have a beautiful state, we have a very diverse state, and our state is very different from the west side and the mountains to the shrub steppe and the desert that we live in southeastern Washington. And so it's getting people here. It's inviting other members of the legislature to come here and to see what our issues are and show them firsthand, so that when we take ideas to Olympia, they're like, why do we care about sagebrush when we live in trees? So happy to continue. Start.
Thank you, April. Thank you for your service, for saying all of this. Yeah.
All right, and I'll be brief because Matt, I feel like he took most of the thinking, but that's okay. Well, and I just want to say, as I was making out my list for things that I wanted to make sure that I hit on today, there was a lot of negativity that was on there. And so I'm like, okay, so then I went through, I'm like, which ones are the positives? So interest rates, lowest that they've been all year, and the parade of homes, where you could see a home from 389,000 up to 2.5 million. Even in today's market, it's a great opportunity to go out and see what's available in Tri-Cities, especially to those folks that might be coming here. It's an easy way to get around Tri-Cities and see what is happening. And at the end of the day, the collaboration from TriDeck, Visitor Convention Bureau. It's never been better with the Realtors. Matt has been a great hire by the Realtors to get out in the community to help tell the story. Andrew, coming on as the new director at the Tri-City Association of Realtors, has been really good trying to pull in the National Association, which is key on helping all of us at this level. And then, of course, our representatives and senators. I can't say enough about how easy we have it. When you call the Home Builders Association, we answer the phone. It's a great day at the HBA, because it is. It is. I mean, of course, we have bad days. However, it is a great day at the HBA, especially on this side of the state. We appreciate all the collaboration. And again, thanks for having us and hosting us here this morning.
Of course, thank you to all three of you for coming in today. Our next Donuts and Development will be October 14th, where we will talk about energy, which is also a big factor in real estate and housing. So thanks everybody for coming in person, and thanks for everybody joining us online. We'll see you next month.